I'd love to get if you could put it in writing, that would be fantastic. I really would appreciate that.
It would be helpful. I think
these burdens are damaging the wealth of Britain and damaging actually the amount of extra tax you could collect.
Right.
Probably the sums of tax that could be owed at stake are significant. Why has this never been used, especially considering HMRC officials came in front of this committee in 2016?
In today's deep dive, we are looking at a startling admission from HM Revenue and Customs HMRC that has left the Public Accounts Committee and many taxpayers demanding answers. For a decade, HMRC has held powerful tools designed to keep the UK's largest corporations in check, yet these powers have sat gathering dust. As we break down the latest parliamentary session, we have to ask, is this system a genuine deterrent or has it been effectively captured by the very businesses it is supposed to regulate? Let's take a look.
It has a wide range of powers, including special measures regime, though it hasn't used these powers on large businesses since it gained the powers in 2016. That's something in particular we want to explore.
Say 337 billion from the 2,000 largest businesses, which is 39% of all our receipts. And if you look at the compliance yield delivered of 15.8 billion in 24-25, that is more than double what it was in 21-22 when it was 7.1 billion. And as a return on investment, £95 for every pound spent.
Let's not get into a political debate about how much of it's wasted.
So it's important that we recognise.
But I appreciate I'd love to get if you could put it in writing, that would be fantastic. I really would appreciate that.
It would be helpful. I think we probably have to.
Because in the end, these burdens are damaging the wealth of Britain and damaging actually the amount of extra tax you could collect.
Right. Looking at the success and saying, right, £1 spent brings £95 in. Why don't you spend more?
In 2016, HMRC gained legislative powers for your special measures regime. So for 10 years, you've had the power to sanction poor behaviour by the worst offenders. Why have you never used those powers?
That we haven't used the special measures powers in the last 10 years. The deterrent effect of the legislation, together with the operational activity that we already undertake, proves highly successful in shifting the behaviour of this particular customer segment.
If there is a small number there, and probably the sums of tax that could be owed at stake are significant, why has this never been used, especially considering HMRC officials came in front of this committee in 2016 and told us that it would fill a gap in your armoury if you had this special regime in place? Why is it that were the officials then incorrect, or are the officials now sitting in front of us incorrect? Which is it?
I would say it is a really important part of our armoury, and in the original design it was intended to have a deterrent effect by being on the statute book, and I think we can say that it has achieved that, because actually we've seen over time large businesses adopt a much more cautious risk approach to.
Does it not raise any concern or alarm bells of you that actually the corporation tax gap has not actually decreased in absolute monetary terms since this came into effect? So if you look between 2021 and today, it's gone up by some £2 billion. Can you understand why there perhaps is public frustration that it's never once been introduced against a large business? I think the one case where it was introduced was a small accountancy firm in Stockport, but there hasn't actually been any large business where it's been deployed, and you've had plenty of time to get on with it. Can you understand why that causes significant public frustration?
Penny, would you like to come
Yes,
in more
I
broadly?
will. I mean, I completely take on board the challenge. We are not afraid to take on the biggest businesses whose behaviours are evasive or deliberately dishonest.
How can you reassure us that you have a strong enough body of evidence that supports such limited use of these powers? And how can you reassure us that that body of evidence is sufficiently robust that you can say we have never or rarely used these powers, but it's okay, they are effective deterrents?
In the era when data is everything, I wondered why it is you've got access to huge amounts of data, and with the cases you're looking at, you could arguably log this data and use it much more effectively. So is there a reason why that data is only being collected inconsistently or sporadically, however you want to look? I wondered whether it was because of this complexity of your rule book, which makes it very difficult for you to actually work out what data you need to capture
Could you tell us how many civil investigations into fraud you have completed into large businesses?
Yeah, and I'm afraid we can't, but as cases move across into our fraud investigation service, their case management system, the case management system that we have to monitor that, isn't capable of being cut by customer segment. So when we were working with the National Audit Office, we were able to track a handful of cases that involved large businesses, but we can't get systemic data on how many large business cases are subject to fraud.
Just to be clear, that information does not exist. HMRC do not know.
No, but
do you think that not having that information does create some gaps though in HMRC's thinking, in that you can't really have a full understanding of the scale of potential tax fraud within these 2,000 large businesses?
Think about that for a second. We're talking about a $1.6 billion investment to fix a system that, by the CEO's own admission, is high risk and amber. But here is the real issue that should concern every taxpayer. We have a wretched rule book, as it was described in Parliament, that is so complex and opaque that it seems designed to protect the bureaucracy rather than the public purse. When you combine that with a total lack of transparency on how many fraud investigations are actually happening, you aren't looking at a deterrent. You're looking at a system that has, at best, lost its way and at worst been completely captured by the very entities it is supposed to be holding to account. Is it really about data, or is it about a lack of will to enforce the law against the giants? Let's keep digging into this.
HMRC's biggest ongoing tax disputes, and again, this is all in the public domain, is with the UK oil giant Glencore, which I believe is a 15-year-long running tax dispute between Glencore and HMRC, with around £1.5 billion at stake. Is there any reassurance you can provide to this committee that such a significant amount of money that is currently being considered, and the fact that that dispute has been going on for such a long time, is there any reassurance that you can give this committee that that dispute will be concluded in the near future?
I don't think my team can comment on this case in this public domain in this way.
You have big sums of money at stake and long-running tax disputes, which are very much in the public domain, as the Glencore one is. It's worrying where we don't see any end in sight to these investigations, which have been going on since I had a full head of hair and no GCSEs. But here I am now as Member of Parliament, and this is a dispute that's still ongoing.
If you lower the bar, it makes me think you want to use it. So do you want to use it? And lowering the bar would help you to do it.
if we lowered the bar, we would want to use it and think we could use it.
I think any decisions on this would likely to be next year for this. I think given where we are in the planning cycle.
If it's taken 10 years to reach the point where you're saying we think a review's a good idea, and it's going to take another year to conclude that review, isn't this an incredibly glacially slow way of working by HMRC when it comes to actually deploying the powers that you have?
I think this transformation is highly ambitious. I think it's high risk. It's very complex with a lot of dependencies. I currently judge it amber. I think it's feasible. I need lots of support from anyone I can get my hands on to keep it on track.
The observation I think all of us would make on the committee in some ways would often, when the follow-up from that is when it all goes horribly wrong in 3 years' time and you're coming back and we're asking you why.
But you actually, I think, bully people using this wretched rule book, which has got more loose ends.
When the state delegates its authority to agencies like HMRC, it does so under a clear promise that rules are applied universally and that the public purse is guarded with vigilance. Yeah, when a decade of legislative power remains entirely dormant, this isn't just an administrative oversight. It is the signature of regulatory capture. History shows that when regulators become overly reliant on collaborative relationships with the entities they oversee, the enforcement mechanism doesn't just slow down, it effectively ceases to exist. By avoiding the very tools designed to punish bad behaviour, the agency inadvertently signals to major corporations that the cost of non-compliance is negligible. When enforcement is treated as a last resort rather than a standard procedure, The tax gap stops being a policy problem and becomes a permanent feature of a broken two-tier economy. This systemic inaction creates a dangerous precedent. It forces small businesses to navigate a labyrinth of complex, wretched rules, while larger entities operate with the quiet assurance that the heavy hand of the law will not fall on them. This discrepancy is not merely an imbalance of resources, it is an erosion of the foundational principle that the law applies to everyone equally. Without robust, visible enforcement, the rulebook loses its teeth, becoming little more than a tool to manage public perception, while the underlying issues, the evasion, the delays, and the lack of systemic data are left to fester. When a government agency can spend $1.6 billion on digital transformation while simultaneously claiming it lacks the basic capacity to track fraud by customer segment, it points to a culture where complexity is used as a shield against scrutiny. Genuine accountability cannot be purchased through software upgrades. It requires the political will to deploy the powers that already exist. If these institutions continue to prioritise their own operational comfort over their mandate to protect the public interest, the integrity of the entire system will continue to decline. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what this says about the trajectory of our political system. If we accept that institutions are too big to monitor or that our laws are too complex to enforce, we aren't just losing tax revenue. We are losing the ability to govern ourselves effectively. The shift toward a state that manages by consultation rather than by statute is a shift that leaves the individual taxpayer behind. Every time a major corporation is let off the hook, or a highly ambitious project is allowed to drift into an amber status for years on end, the public confidence in the system fractures just a little more. I am not interested in waiting for the next parliamentary inquiry in 10 years' time to see if anything has changed. The reality is that the data is there, the powers are on the books, and the accountability is owed to the people, not to the bureaucracy. I'm Beckett Morgan, this is The High Grounds. If you want to keep digging into what is actually happening behind the closed doors of Parliament, make sure to like, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The only way to shift the status quo is to keep the light on the corners of government where it least wants to shine. Thanks for watching.